What's noticeable about when we look at some of these photos is that is the development process or the printing process rather. I noticed that up until sort of the end of the 1800s, most of them tend to say they're albumen prints, whereas once you sort of get into the 20th century, we're then into the silver gelatin. But there've sort of been, but there are a couple of other kinds of printing processes. How did they kind of become more popular?
There was a goal from the outset to, I think, create a more usable medium in as many different formats as possible. I think all along with a thread of intent in being able to publish photographic images more efficiently. That was, of course, one of the major restrictions with daguerreotypes, with calotypes, with many of the early processes, is that they were not, either they were not easily reproducible or not reproducible at all. Daguerreotypes are one-offs. Those are unique objects, very individual objects. With Talbot's calotype process, you did create a negative that could then be reprinted as a positive any number of times. But that still didn't help us too terribly much in terms of publishing, right? How then did you get that image in a book? Printmaking at that point, engraving primarily was still the primary means by which you reproduced an image in publication at that time, and up until later in the 19th century. If you wanted a photograph in a book, it had to be the actual hand printed photograph, essentially adhered onto the page of the book. Not tremendously unlike the way you would create a photo album, but even in a printed book, if you wanted a photographic image, it had to be an actual photograph. So I go into an antique shop, sometimes you'll still find a 19th century book that you pick up, and maybe the frontispiece is an actual photograph rather than a printed image. But then as the 19th century went on, we did invent mechanical means by which to reproduce a photograph. First it was sort of a transitional means in which to do that, but sort of hybrid photographic and printmaking processes. But then by the late 19th century, we had halftone printing and could reproduce as many images in a book as we needed. So you went from some of these books being fairly unique objects, or certainly limited in their production, to being able to print thousands and tens of thousands of books with photographic images in them. So at about that time, our relationship with photography was changing as well, right? Many of the photographs that we've looked at so far would have been not necessarily unique objects, but there wouldn't have been very many released out into the world.